A virgin millionaire who never touched a girl until his private chef tempted him. But what really happens when immense wealth, strict control, and untouched innocence collide with the warmth of temptation? Would money protect his heart, or would love finally shatter the walls around him? And in this story, stay with me until the end, because you'll witness how a man who had everything but never love finally faces his greatest fear, the risk of being vulnerable, and the twist that awaits will shock you. Adrian Blackwood was not just any millionaire. He was the kind of man whose name echoed in business magazines, whispered about in elite gatherings, and admired from afar by those who only saw his power, his precision, and his unshakable composure. At 32, he was a legend in the financial world, a self-made empire builder who had transformed a single tech idea into a vast fortune. His mansion overlooked the city like a fortress, gleaming marble walls and glass towers that reflected the skyline. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Adrian lived a life most people only dreamed of. Luxury cars slept in his garage, priceless art adorned his halls, and he never had to lift a finger to fetch anything for himself. And yet, for all his wealth, for all his control, there was one truth that only he knew. Adrian Blackwood was untouched. A virgin millionaire. He had never held a woman in his arms, never let lips brush against his, never let himself drown in the intimacy that others called love. To outsiders, he was cold. To tabloids, he was the marble man, unbreakable, untouchable, impenetrable. Women chased him, of course. They dressed in glittering gowns, laughed with carefully rehearsed charm, and waited for a chance to catch his eye. But Adrian's eyes never lingered. Why? Because trust was something money could never buy. Adrian had grown up surrounded by betrayal, a mother who abandoned him at 6, a father too busy gambling fortunes away to notice the boys standing in the corner of the room. By the time Adrian inherited the scraps of his family's legacy, he had already sworn one vow: no one will ever use me. No one will ever touch me without earning my soul first. And so, as the years passed, he became harder, colder, richer. Yet beneath all of that marble, there was a hunger he refused to admit even to himself. Adrian's mornings began the same way every day. The chime of the alarm at precisely 5:30 a.m. A sharp 2-mile swim in his indoor pool. Breakfast served by staff who moved silently, eyes lowered. He didn't like noise. He didn't like questions. He liked control. But control, as he would soon discover, has a way of slipping when temptation enters quietly, through something as ordinary as a kitchen door. That morning, the butler had informed him of a change. His longtime chef had retired unexpectedly, leaving the mansion's kitchen without its master. Adrian didn't care for food, not really. To him, meals were fuel. He ate with mechanical precision, never pausing to savor, never daring to indulge. Still, he needed someone competent, someone who wouldn't chatter, who wouldn't pry. So he agreed to an interview with the agency's recommendation, a young private chef named Elena. The name meant nothing to him. Another employee, he thought. Another face who would learn to stay invisible in the mansion's endless rooms. But Adrian had no idea that this simple choice, the hiring of a chef, was about to dismantle the fortress he had spent his entire life building. That evening, as Adrian sat in his study overlooking the city, his thoughts wandered. Not that he would admit it. He was reading quarterly reports, scanning data with a surgeon's precision. But beneath the numbers, beneath the steel of his concentration, his chest ached with something he despised. Loneliness. Loneliness, after all, is the one thing money cannot silence. He pressed his fingers against the glass wall, watching headlights crawl like ants below. The world adored him, envied him, feared him, and yet not a single soul truly knew him. He closed his eyes. In that silence, memories returned. The sound of his father's drunken laughter, the echo of his mother's footsteps as she left without looking back. Every wound had carved a deeper fear into his heart, that to let someone close was to risk being shattered again. So he stayed untouched. A virgin millionaire, not by weakness, but by choice, or at least that's what he told himself, until the following morning. Elena arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. Adrian rarely met staff directly. His butler usually handled all such introductions, but something about this particular morning compelled him to step into the kitchen himself. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe, deep down, the marble man was already beginning to crack. She was nothing like he expected. Not tall and polished like the women who flocked to his galas, not draped in designer labels or dripping with perfume. Instead, Elena stood in a simple chef's uniform, her hair tied back loosely, eyes bright with a kind of warmth Adrian had long forgotten existed. He studied her in silence, his jaw tightening, his instincts prickling. Something about her unsettled him. "Breakfast," he said finally. Just one word, clipped and commanding. "Yes, sir." And with that, Elena moved. She didn't ask what he wanted. She didn't wait for permission. She began to cook with a confidence that filled the sterile kitchen with life. The sound of sizzling butter, the rhythmic chop of fresh herbs, the faint hum of a melody under her breath. It was all so ordinary, and yet to Adrian, it was as if someone had lit a flame in a room he thought would always be cold. He sat at the marble counter, his eyes fixed on her hands, the way she handled the knife precise yet effortless, the way she sprinkled salt with an artist's touch, the way her laughter, yes, she actually laughed at one point, slipped out when she almost dropped a spoon. Adrian's chest tightened. He didn't understand it. He didn't want to understand it. But for the first time in years, his mind wasn't on numbers or deals or betrayals. It was on her. And that terrified him. By the time Elena placed the plate before him, eggs soft, toast golden, herbs arranged like a painting, Adrian felt a strange uncomfortableness, not with the food, but with himself. Because as he lifted the fork, as he tasted the meal, he realized something. It wasn't just food. It wasn't just breakfast. It was care. And Adrian Blackwood, the virgin millionaire who never let a girl touch his hand, was being touched in a way he never expected, by something as simple as a woman's cooking. He set the fork down, his eyes locking on hers. "This will do," he said, his voice as cold as ever. But inside, the marble was beginning to crack. Adrian didn't know it yet, but this chef, the one who dared to laugh in his kitchen, was about to tempt him in ways he had spent his whole life avoiding. Because sometimes the most dangerous temptations don't arrive with diamonds and champagne. Sometimes they arrive with a smile and a plate of eggs.
The mansion had always been silent, a place of marble floors, steel rules, and walls that held no warmth. But now, the silence had changed. Every morning, Adrian found himself aware of sounds he had never noticed before. The clatter of pans, the low simmer of sauces, the faint hum of a tune Elena would sometimes forget she was singing. At first, he told himself it was nothing, just background noise, just another employee doing her job. But deep inside, something restless began to stir. Elena worked differently than anyone Adrian had ever employed. She wasn't afraid of the mansion's cold halls. She didn't shrink when speaking to the staff. Instead, she greeted them with kindness, sometimes a soft word, sometimes a small smile. And the staff, who had lived in fear of Adrian's unyielding rules, found themselves breathing easier when she was near. Adrian noticed. He noticed how the butler's shoulders seemed less rigid, how the maids whispered little jokes again, how the kitchen, once just another lifeless corner of his empire, now pulsed with energy. And though he would never admit it aloud, he noticed how his own mornings had begun to feel different. When he walked into the dining room, he now expected, not consciously, but deep down, to see Elena enter through the side door, carrying a tray, her hair catching the morning light. The marble man was beginning to wait for something, or rather, someone. One evening, Adrian returned from a long day of negotiations. The city's lights glittered below his car windows, but all he felt was exhaustion. The constant battle of power, of deals, of numbers, it weighed on him. When he stepped into the mansion, the butler greeted him. "Dinner is ready, sir. Miss Elena insisted on preparing it fresh when she heard you would be late." Adrian's brow arched. Insisted? He wasn't used to employees insisting on anything. They followed orders. They obeyed. And yet, when he entered the dining room, the table was set with warmth he had never seen before. The lighting was softer, the plates arranged with care, steam rising from a dish that filled the air with unfamiliar spices. Elena stood at the head of the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought you could use something comforting tonight," she said simply. Adrian sat, his face unreadable. Comfort is not necessary. But when he tasted the food, his hand stilled. It was rich, but balanced, flavorful, but gentle, a dish that seemed to whisper rather than shout. And suddenly, without warning, memories stirred. Distant, fragile memories of childhood, of the one night his mother had bothered to cook for him before leaving forever. For a moment, the fortress around his heart trembled. He set the fork down quickly, swallowing hard. "This is fine." Elena smiled, not at his words, but at the way he had paused just a second too long before speaking. She could see what he was trying to hide. Over the next weeks, their encounters became a quiet battle of wills. Adrian tried to remain distant, keeping his answers short, his tone cold. He reminded himself over and over, she is just an employee, nothing more. But Elena never pushed. She didn't flirt, didn't pry, didn't play games like the women at his galas. Instead, she was simply herself. And that was what made her so dangerous, because Adrian had built defenses against liars and seducers. He had no defenses against kindness. One morning, Adrian entered the kitchen earlier than usual. He found Elena standing by the stove, her brow furrowed as she experimented with a new recipe. Flour dusted her cheek, a strand of hair had slipped loose, and she was mumbling to herself about too much salt. Adrian should have walked away, but instead he stood there, watching. There was something mesmerizing about the way she worked, focused yet free, messy yet graceful. For a man who lived by precision, watching her improvise was like stepping into another world. Elena turned suddenly, startled to see him there. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, you're early." Adrian cleared his throat. "I was awake." She smiled faintly. "Would you like to try this?" She held up a spoonful, the steam curling in the air. For a moment, Adrian froze. No one had ever offered him food like this before, not with such simplicity, such casual intimacy. Slowly, he stepped forward, leaned in, and tasted. The flavor was imperfect, too much lemon, too sharp. But Adrian didn't care, because the act itself, the closeness, the warmth, the fact that she had shared something unfinished, unpolished, felt more intimate than anything he had ever experienced. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood's pulse quickened, not from power, not from fear, but from a woman's presence. That night, alone in his study, Adrian couldn't concentrate. He stared at reports, contracts, screens filled with numbers. But behind every figure, every graph, he saw her face, her hands, that smile when she asked him to taste her dish. He leaned back, frustrated, running a hand through his hair. "This is weakness," he told himself. "This is exactly what destroys men like me." And yet, beneath the frustration, a dangerous truth lingered. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't feel entirely alone. The change did not go unnoticed. The staff whispered about how Mr. Blackwood no longer skipped meals, how he sometimes appeared in the kitchen, something he had never done in years, how his eyes seemed softer, though he would never admit it. And Elena, she noticed too, but she said nothing. She just continued being herself, cooking, humming, bringing life into the mansion. She didn't try to break his walls. She just let him lower them piece by piece without realizing. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, the mansion's power flickered. The storm was fierce, rattling the windows and plunging the house into sudden shadows. Most of the staff hurried to secure the estate, but Adrian found himself in the kitchen, drawn again by the faint glow of lanterns. Elena was there, calmly lighting candles, her hair loose now, her apron smudged with flour. She looked up as he entered, her eyes catching the flicker of light. "You shouldn't be here," Adrian said, his voice low. "Why not?" she asked softly. "Because—" He stopped. His throat tightened. He didn't know how to finish. "Because you unsettle me. Because you make me feel. Because every second I spent near you threatens to break everything I've built." But Adrian Blackwood didn't know how to speak those words. So instead, he turned sharply, as if to leave. And yet, he didn't. He stood there, in the flickering candlelight, his breath uneven, his heart pounding. And Elena, sensing the war inside him, simply placed a candle on the counter and said, "Sit. You look tired." For the first time, Adrian obeyed. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing against the glass walls, and inside, the marble man sat in his own kitchen for the first time, across from the woman who was slowly dismantling his fortress. And though neither of them spoke the truth aloud, one thing was undeniable. The Virgin Millionaire was no longer untouchable, because temptation had already stepped inside.
The storm had passed, but the memory of that night lingered. Adrian had sat in the kitchen like an ordinary man, across from Elena, a simple candle burning between them. He hadn't realized it then, but something had shifted, something irreversible. From that evening onward, he found excuses, subtle ones he told himself were logical, to be near her. He would inspect the kitchens at unusual hours. He would pass by the garden just when she happened to be gathering herbs. He even began asking small, unnecessary questions about the meals, like what spices are in this, or why did you choose that dish? Not because he cared for the answer, but because it meant hearing her voice a little longer. And Elena, though she never mocked him, knew exactly what he was doing. One late afternoon, Adrian walked into the kitchen and found her kneading dough. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, dusting the air with golden flecks that clung to her hair. For a moment, he froze in the doorway. His empire, his wealth, his reputation, all of it felt distant compared to this quiet, ordinary scene. Elena glanced up and caught him staring. "Something wrong, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her lips curving faintly. He cleared his throat, straightening. "I wanted water." She chuckled softly, wiping flour from her hands before handing him a glass. "The staff can bring it, you know. You don't need to come all the way here." Adrian accepted the glass, but didn't move. His gaze lingered. His voice, when it came, was lower. "Most of them fear me. They bring what I ask, but they never stay." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He hadn't meant to admit it, not to her, but Elena only tilted her head, studying him with eyes that saw far more than he wanted. "Maybe that's because you don't let them stay," she said gently. The truth cut deeper than he expected. That night, Adrian paced his study. Her words echoed in his mind. "You don't let them stay." Why had he said that? Why had he revealed anything at all? He was a fortress. He had spent years perfecting the art of distance, and yet, in the span of weeks, this woman had made cracks appear where no one else had dared. Finally, unable to resist, he poured himself a drink and returned to the kitchen. The mansion was quiet, the staff gone to bed, but the light in the kitchen still glowed, and there she was. Elena sat at the counter, a notebook open, her pen moving quickly as she sketched ideas for recipes. She looked up in surprise. "Mr. Blackwood, couldn't sleep?" Adrian hesitated. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave, but his feet carried him forward. "No," he said finally. "I couldn't." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint ticking of the clock and the rustle of Elena's pen. Then Adrian's voice broke the stillness. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, "what it would be like to trust someone completely?" Elena's pen stilled. She looked up at him, her expression soft. "Yes, but it's rare, and it's frightening." Adrian leaned against the counter, his jaw tightening. "I wouldn't know. I've never trusted anyone enough." Her gaze lingered on him, steady, unwavering. "Not even once?" He swallowed. His voice was almost a whisper. "No, not even once." Adrian's brow furrowed, not in judgment, but in something else, pity perhaps, or sadness. And for reasons he didn't understand, he found himself speaking the truth he had buried for years. "I've never been with anyone, never touched a woman, never let one touch me." The confession hung in the air, heavy, raw, unthinkable for a man of his power and wealth. Elena's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't laugh. She didn't mock. She simply closed her notebook and set it aside. "Why?"
she asked softly. Adrian turned away, his hands clenched. Because intimacy is weakness. Women only see the money, the name, the empire. They don't see me, and I refuse to give them a piece of me they haven't earned. For a moment, silence reigned. The only sound was Adrian's uneven breathing. Then Elena's voice, quiet but firm. Not all women are the same. He turned to her, eyes burning, as if daring her to prove him wrong, and in that instant, something passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. The following days were different. Elena no longer looked at him as just her employer. She saw the lonely man beneath the marble exterior. And Adrian, he found himself drawn closer, not by choice, but by need. Every interaction carried weight now. When their hands brushed as she handed him a dish, when their eyes locked across the table, when laughter slipped unexpectedly between them, desire began to hum in the air, subtle but constant. And Adrian, who had sworn to remain untouchable, felt temptation gnaw at him with every passing moment. One evening, Elena was preparing a late supper. Adrian entered, his expression harder than usual, as if trying to mask something. "You should rest," she said, glancing up. "I can't," he replied shortly. "What's wrong?" she frowned. He hesitated, then slammed his hand against the counter. The sound made her jump. "What's wrong," he said through clenched teeth, "is that I can't think straight anymore. You've invaded every corner of my mind. I can't work. I can't sleep. I can't breathe without seeing you." The outburst shocked them both. Adrian rarely lost control, but now his chest heaved, his eyes wild, as if he were confessing a crime. Elena's lips parted, her heart racing. "Adrian," he stepped closer, his breath ragged. "Do you know what that means for a man like me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What does it mean?" His answer trembled, raw and unguarded. "It means I'm terrified, because, for the first time in my life, I want." The words struck like lightning. The silence that followed was heavy with everything unsaid. The air between them seemed to thrum, pulling them closer, closer, until Adrian's hand hovered inches from hers. But then, at the last second, he pulled back, turning sharply away. "No, I can't. If I give in, I'll lose everything." Elena's chest tightened, but she didn't move closer. She simply said, softly but firmly, "Or maybe you'll finally gain something real." Adrian stood frozen, his back to her, his breath uneven. The empire he had built on distance, discipline, and denial was crumbling, and Elena's words, "gain something real," echoed in the ruins. For the first time, the virgin millionaire stood at the edge of surrender. The only question was, would he leap or retreat?
The nights after Adrian's confession were restless. He replayed Elena's words over and over. Or maybe you'll finally gain something real. They haunted him. They teased him. They clashed violently with everything he had built his life upon. For years, Adrian had convinced himself that desire was a trap, intimacy a poison, and vulnerability a weakness. And yet, the one woman who dared to step inside his fortress had shown him the opposite, that perhaps what he feared most was the very thing he craved. Still, he resisted, until fate intervened. It happened one Friday evening. Adrian had just finished a brutal day of negotiations. He stormed into the mansion, exhausted, his tie loose, his patience gone. But instead of silence, he was greeted by laughter.
The staff, his staff, were gathered in the kitchen, drawn in by Elena's warmth. She was teaching them a recipe, her sleeves rolled, her hands moving with confidence. For once, the mansion felt alive. When Adrian appeared, the laughter stopped abruptly. The staff rose, eyes wide, bracing for his wrath. But Elena, unfazed, simply turned and said, "You're just in time. Come try this." The audacity shocked him. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared. And yet, he found himself stepping forward, accepting the spoon she held out. The taste was rich, comforting, but what lingered wasn't the food, it was the way everyone looked at him, waiting for a reaction. The way Elena smiled as though she knew exactly what he was thinking. Adrian felt something crack inside. This was what his empire lacked. This was what he lacked. Later that night, the mansion was quiet again. The staff had gone to bed. Only Adrian and Elena remained, cleaning up the remnants of the meal. As Elena reached for a pan, she slipped, the heavy skillet clattering against the counter. Adrian reacted instantly, his hand shooting out to steady her. For a moment, they froze, her body leaning into his hand firm against her waist. Their eyes locked. And in that silence, everything unspoken between them blazed into clarity. Adrian's chest rose and fell sharply. He had spent years avoiding this moment, years convincing himself it was impossible. But now, here it was, and for once, he didn't pull away. Slowly, cautiously, he lowered his head. Their lips brushed, tentative, trembling, yet charged with years of denial breaking apart in a single spark. It was not a kiss of conquest, it was a kiss of surrender. And in that instant, the Virgin Millionaire was no longer untouched. He had stepped into the world he had feared and discovered it was not weakness at all. It was life. But love, as always, came with consequences. The very next morning, Adrian's phone buzzed with a message that made his blood run cold. A photo of him and Elena in the kitchen, close, intimate, vulnerable. And below it, a single line, "Pay me, or the world will see." Adrian's empire was built on control, on reputation. If the press learned that the untouchable Blackwood hair had fallen for his private chef, if they learned about his virginity, his secret, it would destroy everything. His first instinct was rage. He wanted to crush whoever dared threaten him. But then he looked at Elena, who stood quietly across the room, her face pale. This wasn't just his secret anymore, it was hers too. For the first time in his life, Adrian faced a choice. Return to the marble fortress, deny her, silence the scandal, protect the empire at all costs, or take the risk, claim her, stand beside her no matter what the world thought. The choice tore at him, but when Elena's voice broke the silence, his heart made the choice for him. "If being with me costs you everything, Adrian, then let me go." Her voice was soft, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She was ready to walk away, to protect him even at the expense of her own heart. And that was the moment Adrian realized she was the one person who wanted him, not his empire. He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. His voice shook, but his eyes burned with resolution. "No, I've lived my whole life protecting everything that doesn't matter. Money, power, walls." He pulled her closer, his forehead against hers. "You're the first thing that does matter, and I won't lose you." Elena's breath caught, a single tear slipping free. "Adrian!" But he silenced her with a kiss, firm this time, a vow. The blackmailer was dealt with quickly. Adrian's wealth and influence ensured that, but for the first time, he didn't care about the mechanics of control.
What mattered was Elena. What mattered was the life she had breathed into his cold mansion, the warmth she had brought into his frozen heart. And as the days turned into weeks, the staff noticed the change. The marble man no longer seemed so cold. The house no longer felt like a tomb. And Adrian Blackwood, once a virgin millionaire untouched by any woman, had transformed into something far rarer. A man who had finally chosen love. One evening, months later, Adrian sat at the same kitchen table where it had all begun. Elena placed a dish before him, smiling playfully. "Be honest, too much salt?" He laughed, a sound his staff were still not used to hearing. "Perfect," he said, pulling her into his arms. The storm outside had ended long ago, but in its place, something far more powerful had taken root. A love that no empire could buy, a bond that no scandal could break, and a promise that no fortress could contain. And as Adrian kissed Elena under the soft glow of candlelight, one truth became undeniable. The virgin millionaire was untouched no longer. He had been changed forever by love's first and greatest temptation.